In this tutorial, we're going to focus on the hand placement and the body height to stop the acrobat sinking into the ground midway through the cartwheel. We're also going to export the cleaned animation out as a clip file for use in other animations. So to start off with, I just want to have a look at our character's arms, because there is actually a little bit of rogue data that appears on the arms. And watch the pink arm in particular as it goes through the cycle. I'm going to go through very slowly, and you can see that almost straight away the elbow bends the wrong way, just for 2 frames. We're going to get rid of that, and then when he goes into the cartwheel, there's another position just here where the pink elbow, spin it round so you can see that better, where the pink elbow bends the wrong way just for a couple of frames. So we're going to get rid of that first, and the easiest way to do that is actually just to go into the mocap data and delete the rogue keyframes. So if I select any part of the arm, I'm going to go into my cartwheel layer here so I can look at the raw mocap data. I'll just double click on the arm. If you double click on the upper arm, all of its children become selected. And then I'm going to look at the curve editor. Frame the animation so we can see all the animation data. And we can see for sure, let's just expand that out time-wise. You can see for sure there's 2 frames there where the data really doesn't work. There's a big step in the data. And there's 2 frames further on here where it doesn't work as well. So I'm just going to go in and delete all the keyframes which have a step in them. These 2 at the top. Delete. These 2 here. Delete. These 4 here. Delete. And just zoom in a little bit. And these 2 here. Delete those. So that's nice and clean. And go along to this end where we've got a similar problem. And just delete these 2. Delete these 2. And zooming in a bit more. Just delete these 2. So we can see the curves are all nice and smooth again now. Even though they're linear, we're still getting a pretty nice smooth curve because we've only skipped a couple of frames. So let's have a look and see if that's fixed the animation. You can see now that the elbow stays the right way around, and when it goes into the ground, it still stays the right way around as well. So we clean that up a bit. We're going to now set up some layers to do that adjustment that I told you about. So just select the cat parent to start off with. We're going to create a new world layer, and we're going to call this one height animation. And we're going to create another new world layer, and we call that hand placement. We're actually going to work with both these layers together, and the reason is we want to adjust the whole character together, but I like to keep the hand placement in a separate layer to the overall height adjustment through the animation to make it easier to edit later on. A general rule of thumb is if you're doing world space stuff like this, like keeping the hands still in one place, is not to put keyframes for the same body part on 2 different layers. So I'm not going to put any hand keyframe data on the height animation layer. I'm going to use that to lift up the pelvis and the foot platforms at the right point. And I'm not going to put any pelvis or foot animation on the hand placement layer, just to keep it nice and tidy. So it's just a case of remembering that when I'm putting keyframes down for the pelvis and the feet, I'll keep it in that layer, and when it's for the hands, I'll keep it in that layer. Now the first thing I'm going to do to help me in this process is I'm going to put some dummy keyframes on the hand placement layer just to mark the times at which the hands touch the ground and leave the ground. Those are important times, just like they are for the feet. So with the hand placement layer selected, I'm going to select the hand IKs, both of them there. I'm going to put a keyframe there while they're in the air, just like I did with the feet. Go through to the other side and put a keyframe there while they're in the air. And those are my 0 keyframes, which are going to mark the point at which the mocap data stays the same. Now I'm going to go through and try and work out when each of these touches the ground. So as the hand comes down, remember we're not talking about the point at which it actually goes through the floor, we're talking about the point at which you can see the weight taken on the elbow. And I think it's 35 is where I think it touches the ground, because you can see that the elbow changes direction just slightly at that point. And you can actually see the weight being taken on the body as the body changes direction just at that moment. So I think 35 is the point where the hand hits the ground. I'm just going to place a keyframe there, just a dummy keyframe, and I will change its value later on. And then the point at which it leaves the ground, it's a bit difficult to judge. If I just go F3 so I can see underneath the thing, I'm trying to judge the point at which the elbow stops taking the weight, and you can see there it's bent. Oh, in fact there I think is a good point where it seems to naturally move up. So I'm going to use frame 43 as the point where it leaves the ground. Same for the other hand, with the hand IK selected. Right. Just go back to F3. Again, I'm looking for where the elbow bends. I have to F3 that just so I can see. Oh well, there, look. Frame 40 I think is where the pink arm lands on the ground, so I'm going to put a keyframe there and go through. I know it's moving around a lot, but remember we're looking for when it looks like the arm is suddenly free. Or 49. I think 49 is going to be the last point at which it hits the ground, so I'm just going to put a keyframe in there. Now those aren't adding extra animation at the moment because they're 0 keyframes, but all they're doing is they're marking the times where I think the hands touch and leave the ground. So now I've marked those, and you'll see why I need to mark them when I come to do the hand placement. Now I've marked those, I'm actually going to go and do the height adjustment on the height adjustment layer. So select the pelvis, go into height animation here. So I'm just going to mark the point where the feet leave the ground. So on this particular foot, it leaves the ground on frame 29. In fact, if you wanted to check that, you could just go to your foot placement layer and see where you actually put the keyframe in before. Back to height animation. I'm going to select both foot platforms and the pelvis and place a keyframe down at that point. I'm going to go through to the point where the foot lands on the ground, which is there, and I'm going to put another keyframe there for both foot platforms and the pelvis. So what I'm saying by putting these keyframes in is everything before this keyframe, the character is on the ground, so I don't want to change the height. Everything after this keyframe, the character is on the ground, so I don't want to change the height. So I can only edit in between these two keyframes to change the height of my character. So the first and most sensible thing to do is to go right into the middle keyframe to look at the character and then literally lift that character up. I need to put on auto key for this. And you can see now that the arms become outstretched because they're trying to reach that IK target down here and they can't reach, they're just pointing at it. And because of that, you can see I won't be able to tell when the elbow bends, when it starts taking the weight, which is why I marked those keyframes earlier. So just run that through, just as a kind of global view on whether it works or not. I mean, certainly he goes high enough. One thing I want to do now is I want to have a look at the trajectory of the pelvis. So if you select the pelvis and just click trajectories up here, you can see we get a nice curve showing us the path that the pelvis is taking through space. And one of the reasons this currently looks a little bit unnatural is because it's not a nice smooth arc. One of the 12 principles of animation, arcs, make sure that your curves are smooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and I'm going to put a little keyframe either side with the foot platforms as well. Just lift it up a bit like that, and one there. Just lift that up to try and get a kind of smoother curve. And you can see that that's a much more natural trajectory for the pelvis to take at this particular point. I could further enhance that a little bit. I could bring the whole thing down a little bit at this point, just to give it a little bit more of an acceleration on the lift there. There we go. There's a little dint on that frame there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in to the keyframe, that's the top keyframe, I'm going to go into the keyframe next to it. Just going to lift it up very slightly and go away. It's made a better curve, but I don't want to have too many keyframes, so I want to keep this new keyframe. I'm just going to delete the old keyframe at the top there. It's always best to try and have as few keyframes on each layer as possible. Keep the keyframe data sparse. Otherwise you start overwriting too much of the mocap data and making the animation look less natural. So now we've got a decent trajectory. Let's just go back to parameters. Let's have a quick look at this from the camera view, see what it looks like. Very good. That'll do for now. And we're going to go in and we're going to start working on the hand placements now. Now, you'll remember earlier that I set the IK number of bones to 2. This was for importing the animation data and making sure that the placement of the IKs followed the hands. What I'm going to do though is I'm now going to animate that to take 3 bones into account, because there's some quite good functionality. You can rotate the angle of the hands so they lie flat on the ground very easily, but you have to have the hands within the IK chain. So I'm just going to go into my hand placement layer, start doing all my animation there. I want to set the number of IK bones to 2 here, so that it stays at 2 all the way through the animation up to this point. Give it a little wiggle, just make sure it finishes on 2 again. Now it doesn't put a keyframe down here, which is a little bit annoying, but you can tell that the key is set because you've got little red corners on your slider. And then by the time it comes down to where the hand is placed on the ground, I want to animate it up to 3. Go through to this point, keep it at 3. So give it a little wiggle there again to lay down another keyframe of 3. And come back up to this point where it's in the air again and set it back to 2. So you can see the slider goes up and down there as we go through the cartwheel. Reset back to 2 by the end. The same with the other arm. Just before it gets there, I'm going to have it on 2. When it actually lands on the ground, I'm going to have it on 3. Going to give it another little wiggle just before it leaves the ground to ensure that it stays on 3 between those 2 points. And then when it's back up in the air again, safe distance away, I'll animate it back to 2. Ooh, 2. So why have we done that? Well, all will become obvious. So what I'm going to do now is I'll go back to my first hand here, choose the IK target, come on to frame 35, and just like I did with the foot placement, I'm going to lift the hand up until it's in at ground level. Now, This is the bit I like. If I rotate the IK target, make sure it's in local, I rotate the IK target like this, you can see I can rotate the angle of the hand. So I can make it flat on the ground. And then I'm just going to move it a little bit because actually, although it's landed there, the original mocap data, the heel of the hand was there. So I'm actually just going to move it forward. I'm going to do that in a local space as well, so it's easier to do it. By about that much, just by eye, to about there, and lift it up a little bit as well. Okay. Just like with the feet, I want it to be a little bit underground, but not completely. Now we'll do a polish layer in a minute where we fix things like the fact it goes through the floor there, but we're going to go through exactly the same procedure that we did with the feet. So I'm just going to find my point helper that I used earlier. Here it is. I'm going to align it and orient it to my IK. Turn auto key back on. Select the IK. And go on to frame 43 just before it leaves the ground, and align my AK target back up to there with orientation as well. And then I'm going to delete the keyframes in between. Now there is a little bit of movement. Part of that movement is because the arm becomes overextended at that point and it can't actually reach that point anymore. So that's a little bit unnatural, but we will fix that with our height adjustment in a minute as we just refine this a little bit. And part of that is due to the fact that it's got a Euler controller on. So exactly the same as we did with the foot control, make sure we're on the cartwheel layer. Go to assign controller, expand out to the rotation one here, change our Euler rotation to a TCB rotation, and that should keep the hand more stable on the ground. At least it does until it hyperextends there. So now I've done that, I'm actually just going to go into the height animation layer and tweak the height animation so it doesn't leave the ground at that point. And remember, I'm not actually using any keyframes on the hands on this particular layer. So it goes up to there. It's that extra keyframe I put in. Let's put the trajectories back on. Make sure it's back in world space so I can move it straight up and down. There we go. I've lowered it down. That's going to change the shape of my curve. So what the implication is that I made the curve too high in total anyway, so I'm just going to move them all down a little bit. Move this one down a little bit more. I'm trying to get that nice curve shape back again. This one going to be way too high, isn't it? Move it down to about there. A bit more. Okay. See what the hand does now as we go through. Stays perfectly flat on the ground as we go over. Like I say, we'll put a polish layer on later just to take off any weird things like the bit here where it goes into the ground. So we're going to do exactly the same with this one now. Go on to our hand placement layer. Lift that up so it's just on ground level again. I'm going to do some nifty rotation. Like so, just to get the hand down. Look underground, make sure it's just protruding the right amount and that it's flat-ish. Then I'm going to take my point helper from here, align it to my IK target, and orient it. Select my IK target, turn auto key back on, and we'll go through to that frame, frame 49, and align it back to the IK target. Okay, and go to the cartwheel layer, delete everything between it, frame 40, and see how that looks. It's pretty good. In fact, it's very good considering it's Euler and not Quaternion. So just go back and cartwheel, change the controller for this one as well to TCB, just to give it even more stability. And now we have our hand placements. Let's see what the final thing looks like from our camera view. Very good. Right, so I'm going to do a few last bits of cleanup. The first bit of cleanup I'm going to do is sort the hand landing out, where the hand hits the ground and scoops through a little bit before it plants. And I'm also going to do a little bit on the foot, so when the foot takes off you can see that it just kind of stays hovering, and I'm just going to loosen that up a little bit. And then in mid-air you can see that the feet have gone a little bit wild, so I'm going to fix them as well. So to fix the hands, first of all, and just select the IK. Now go on to hand placement layer. We can see at the point here where the IK gets planted is where the scooping happens just before that, and it's actually happening during that transition for the number of IK bones. If I zoom in a bit closer, you can see that the IK target actually moves along the hand as it goes through that transition. So what I need to do is I need to make that transition happen a bit earlier, so that the landing looks a little bit more natural. Now, I mentioned that this keyframe doesn't exist on the IK target, but it does exist. So I'm just going to open up the dope sheet, and I'm going to expand up the Acrobat. Oh, I need to have the limb selected. I'm going to expand up the palm here, and within there you have a thing called limb data, and then you have layer limb IK position here, hand on the hand placement layer, and these keyframes are the keyframes that store the transition. So what I can do is I can just start that transition a little bit earlier and end it a little bit earlier, and that should give you a much more natural transition. There we go, you can see it lands on the ground smoothly now. Just going to do the same for the other hand. So expand up, limb data, IK limb position, and these ones here. So let's go to the point where it's scooped in. Let's move this a little bit earlier, and this a little bit earlier. There we go, we found a... No, we haven't, that still goes in. There we go, found a suitable position for both. Just by eye, there's no kind of rhyme or reason to it. So now they don't intersect. Let's just have a look from the camera view again. See what it looks like. Excellent. And the last thing is just the feet that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to put on a new layer for the feet. And this time it's going to be a local layer because I'm just going to be adjusting the angle of the feet as we go through. So I'm going to call it foot polish animation. And as we go through, just let's keep an eye on the yellow foot first. That leads quite nicely, but as it's in mid-air, it starts okay and it gets tighter and tighter and tighter up to the leg, which is quite an unnatural position, and really tight just before it lands to there. But by the time we get back to there, we want it to be at the position it was at. So I'm going to put a keyframe there and a keyframe there, because I'm happy with it before that point and after this point. And then in between, all I'm going to do is get it to the point here where it's at its worst, which is about here. Turn auto key on. I'm going to rotate it in that axis there, just to give it a more natural angle. And it should keep a fairly natural angle all the way over the arc there, because it's gradually building back to my natural angle there, and then it tightens up just in that last bit to land on the ground. So the blue foot next. The blue foot is alright right up until the moment it leaves the ground. So frame 29 when it's on the ground is fine, and it's going to go all the way over, and it needs to be back in position by frame 57. So I put a key in there. Now this one looks quite wrong from the start, so just zoom in a little bit. So I'm just going to go in and put a bunch of extra keyframes on. I'm just going to rotate that down like so to make it look like it's left the ground. 2 should do it actually. And then it will gradually move back to its mocapped position through that run and still look quite natural. So there we go. I've got some foot polish on there as well. Let's look at the completed thing one more time. They look great. Right, now we've got our animation. We need to first of all save it out, because this is going to be a file that we might want to revisit with all the layers, and then we're going to collapse the layers. So do save as, name these with the character's name in as well when they're the final ones, because it's cleaned up but only for this character. So I'm going to call it Acrobat Cartwheel Cleaned Layers. Save. So now I've got that, I'm at liberty to collapse all my layers and save it out as a clip file for use in further animation. And that's very easy. Just make sure you click on the available slot here and click this button to collapse all the layers down. When it says collapse layers here, you want to make sure frames per sample says 1, because that means that you're going to get a keyframe on every frame, just like you did in the original mocap data. If you have a higher number than that, it will start to smooth out the mocap data and you'll lose some of the clarity. And just OK. Now you have one called collapsed layer. This is an absolute layer, so this is a brand new layer. We can just run through and make sure everything looks fine, which it does. So I can delete all the other layers now. So just go onto the previous layer, click delete, 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 all the way back. And my new layer, I'm now going to call Cartwheel. Then I can save that as a clip. So click the save button down here on the clip manager. You have to have the parent selected to get the clip manager. I'm going to go to my project file. So I've got to my project folder here. I'm just going to put this straight in my scenes folder, and I'm going to call it Acrobat Cartwheel. Save it as a clip. When you click save, it asks you these things: save the entire frame range, yes or no; save the entire layer stack, yes or no. You can just leave them as they are because we've only got one layer, so just save that. And now we have an animatable clip that we can use for blending mocap later. and that's going to be the subject of the next tutorial.